Welcome, everyone. I'm going to give it just a minute or two for participants to cycle in, and then we'll get started. Okay, hello again, and welcome everyone to Requirement to Reduce 401 Plan Fees, What Every Plan Sponsor Needs to Know. We're glad that you've joined us today. Before I hand it over to our presenters, just a few quick housekeeping items. First of all, this webinar will be recorded, and you'll receive the recording link and a sample checklist to evaluate your plan fees, which will be emailed to you later today. So go ahead and look for that in your inbox. This webinar will run 50 minutes, 50, with 10 minutes Q&A at the end. If you have any questions for Maria or Sherry, please put them in the Q&A box located in your Zoom toolbar. To find your Zoom toolbar, just hover your mouse over the bottom or top of your screen and the toolbar will pop up. And then just look for the Q&A icon. All right, now I'd like to introduce your presenters. Sherry Boutwell is a partner at Boutwell Fay LLP law firm. For over 30 years, she has focused in the areas of employment, benefit law, and ERISA, with an emphasis on retirement and defined compensation plans. She advises and counsels a broad range of clients, including employers, employees, plan fiduciaries, financial institutions, government agencies, and trade organizations on a wide range of employee benefit matters. Sherry has extensive experience and is a highly sought after speaker, which is why we have her here today. She's also a writer and advisor on employee benefit topics. Maria Areola CPA is a partner in LSL's Audit and Assurance Department. For over 30 years, she has helped privately held businesses and their owners with financial reporting, business and individual taxation solutions, and consulting needs. She works with clients in the real estate, manufacturing and distribution, and healthcare industries, along with many employee benefit audit plans. Maria manages our ERISA 401k plan audit department and leads her department in staying up to date on the ever-changing trends, laws, and Department of Labor regulations. Whew, that's a lot of information to bring to you all. So now I'm going to hand it over to Sherry and Maria. Take it away.
Thank you. Well, I flashed up on the screen, but it's on the slides, the disclaimer that this is actually not legal advice or accounting advice. It's just a presentation. We're going to cover a few items today. We welcome your questions, so you can put those in the question and answer box, and we'll be monitoring that. 3 components of plan fees to evaluate: ERISA requirements, what annual benchmarking looks like, and some other important areas to monitor.
But the most important part, does everybody have a cup of coffee? Because it's 2:00 in the afternoon and we're talking about retirement plans. But that's okay. We're going to make it super fun for all of you guys. Let's do this.
It is fun. It is fun. So let's start with the types of fees that you want to evaluate, and start with just the basic premise. The way the statute that applies here, the law, is written, is that everything you can pay out of a 401k plan is prohibited. Absolutely everything. Even paying the participants their benefits is prohibited. And then there's a specific exemption that lets you pay benefits. There's another exemption that lets you use plan assets to pay service providers, such as your record keepers, your third-party administrators, your auditors, very important function there, and the investment providers. So you have to have an exemption in order to pay anything out of a plan. The services exemption that we're going to focus on today, it requires that everything be arm's length and the fees be reasonable. Well, the term reasonable is a term that lawyers can drive trucks through, and they do. So what's important to know here is that if you are an employer, a plan fiduciary, you have an obligation to determine that your service providers are being paid a reasonable fee compared to other service providers and compared to the services that you're actually getting in the, for whatever you're paying. So you have to know what you're paying, you have to know what you're paying for, and you have to compare it to what is in the market. And that, what we just described, is a process. So whenever you're evaluating fiduciary requirements, what you look at is the process that was used, not necessarily the end result that was obtained. You can prudently, and that all processes have to be prudent, you can prudently hire a service provider and agree to pay them fees. And if it doesn't turn out well, as long as you followed a prudent process, you are fine. However, the prudent process has to be at an expert standard. ERISA requires that you be an expert or that you hire an expert in this process. For most plans, you're not going to have class action lawsuits, although we see that in the press. In the press, every day, if you go Google this, you will see that there is a huge amount now of class action lawsuits filed against 401k plan employers, fiduciaries, and providers. Most of those are filed against very, very large plans, not smaller plans. But even if you're not a target for that, the Department of Labor, the United States Department of Labor, has jurisdiction and does investigations, and there's some amount of reporting that goes on your Form 5500 that you must file every year. If you have that type of investigation, they will ask, do you know what's being paid? How much is being paid? Who's it being paid to? What are they doing for those services? What process did you engage in? And you have to be able to articulate the answers to those questions. So the other thing we need to pay attention to is some fees can be paid by a plan and some fees cannot be legally paid by a plan. Let's think through, what does that mean? When can you pay it? If it is what's called a set lore, that's a term of art, set lore, that means an employer is making a business choice. They're choosing to have a plan. They're choosing to say, this is how the plan is going to be designed, or they're choosing to terminate the plan. Those fees can never be paid by the plan. So if an employer has a plan and says, I think I want to amend that plan to be a safe harbor plan, and they engage a TPA and pay a fee to determine, is it going to cost us more or less? How is this going to impact us, the employer? That's a set lore fee. Implementing that decision, setting up the safe harbor plan, preparing the notices, sending those out, making sure the right amounts are being deducted from pay or met or matched or contributed, that's not a set lore function. That's an administrative function. So administrative functions can be paid by a plan, set lore cannot. One of the first things you want to do when you're trying to figure out plan fees is gather up all the documents that you need that bear on this. So that would be the plan document, the trust document, the investment policy statement, if any, and if it has any guidance on that. The relevant service agreements that you have with your service providers, or if you're hiring someone, the proposed service agreement. We'll talk a little bit more about service agreements as we move along. The fee disclosure. So the law requires that any service provider give you disclosures about what their fees are and how they're calculated. Sometimes there can be hidden fees, and I'll let Maria speak to that as well. But they are required to give a disclosure to the plan fiduciary, the employer, or a committee, or whoever's making this decision. And then the plan administrator, in turn, is required to give certain disclosures about fees to participants so that they can make intelligent decisions. There may be side agreements, and you need to look at if there are any related parties involved. There was a case reported last week, big case. It was Lowe's home improvement stores. their 401k plan, there was a class action lawsuit, and Lowe's actually settled the lawsuit, but the service provider, the consulting firm, administration firm that had helped them select funds for their plan, was also named and accused of having related party, problems because they used their own discretion to bring in their own funds. So you as the employer need to pay attention to, are there any related parties involved here? And Lowe's settled, paid a decent sized settlement. The service provider actually was held last week to not be liable because it was ultimately the employer's decision. Now, that case may be appealed, we don't know. And maybe it'll be overturned on appeal. But the message there is the buck stopped with the employer, even though there was a related party that was the advisor to the employer. The buck stopped with the employer. So it's important to know what you need to be asking about.
Sherry, I have a question. In the process of doing audits, I find sometimes that the sponsors are a bit between a hard rock and, whatever that thing is.
Rock and a hard place.
Yes, that one. And like, for example, they work with a large insurance company that helps them with their workers' comp and a lot of other companies. But the fees that they're paying on their 401k is on the high side, on the high end on it, but they're willing to pay that high fee because the sponsor itself is getting a much better deal on the other side. What do you think about that? I mean, I understand the plan is a separate entity and but what kind of a recommendation, what kind of thoughts can you give us when that happens? Because economically, it's really hard for that employer to give up on something because it's costing more on the other hand.
Right. Well, what I think is not as important as what the court thought in a case called ABB versus Tussey. There actually was a trial with this as the issue. And
Wow.
in that case, the record keeper said to the employer, look, if you give us the 401k business, we will throw in your deferred comp plan for free. And so the employer—
Exactly what I'm talking about.
Exactly. And that was exactly what happened in that case. And in that case, the court held that that was a breach of fiduciary duty and a prohibited transaction, and did hold the employer liable for the difference between what they paid and what they should have paid. And that sort of, conflict of interest that the employer found themselves in, but didn't even really recognize it because their record keeper didn't tell them, by the way, you have a conflict here. That really influenced the court. Now, you've still got to prove the damages, right? And the damages are the difference between what they would have paid had they really negotiated the fees on a standalone basis and the fees that the plan actually paid, which sort of picked up the freebies to the employer. So there actually is a reported case with exactly that situation.
Got it. Does the service provider that's doing that, did they get in trouble?
Well, that's the case we saw last week, the Lowe's case. I personally, as an ERISA lawyer, was shocked at the decision that the employer was, they paid their settlement, but the service provider was completely let off the hook. So wow. I don't know that one will stand. The other thing to think about, just a word to the wise, don't pay your lawyers out of plan assets. And here's why. If you pay the lawyer, the plan is the client's lawyer. So if the lawyer sees, first of all, there may be no attorney-client privilege as to what you're talking to that attorney about. But secondly, let's say I'm the lawyer and I see something that is some sort of breach or wrongdoing, well, now my client's the plan, and I may have a duty to say to them, hey, by the way, your committee didn't do a good job, or whatever I need to say. So rarely are our plan assets used to pay lawyers. You just
Got it. So if let's say you're going through an acquisition or a merger or something, and you have an amount of legal fees, the corporation or the employer is the one that's really going to carry that burden. They can't be moving anything to the 401k. Not even a share.
Right. So again, two things you've got to pay attention to. Is it a company expense or truly a plan expense? And if you're going to pay lawyers through a plan, make sure that you have, you understand the risks, right, of doing that, and that you are also only billing to the law firm through the plan things that are plan related and not corporate costs.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah.
That helps a lot.
Yeah. The other thing to pay attention to is, on these package deals. So I'm going to circle back to service agreements, because this is an issue that we have seen repeatedly. It is often the case that even if you negotiate the fees separately for the deferred comp plan and the 401k plan, the record keepers tend to lump it together when they write the service agreement. So we always say, no. You have to have two service agreements. How can we possibly slice this baby up if it's all lumped together in one service agreement? And they understand. I don't know why they keep sending us, especially to our firm, because they know they should know where we're going to go with this. But it should really be in two, and the fees should be stated separately, not one lump sum for all of that work in the disclosures and in the agreements.
That's a good point.
Okay, let me move forward, and we'll move on to the next. Let's see if it's going to move for me. There we go. Well, we talked a little bit. Maybe I moved too far. Did I? Yeah, I know. I don't know. It's my computer's being slow. All right, there we go. Got it working. So now let's talk a little bit about figuring. You've gone through, can it be paid? Who am I paying? Is it a necessary service? Now you're going to say, is it reasonable? We're going to try to figure out, is this a reasonable fee, and how are we going to determine that? Well, the way to determine that is you have to have some method, and there are multiple methods. There's not a one size fits all here, but you have to have some method, a prudent process to say, I did look at what was available in the market for my plan, and I compared it against plans of similar types and similar sizes. So if you think about a 401k plan, there are many bells and whistles that can be added to a 401k plan, and they're complicated pieces of machinery. So if you are a small plan, you've only got a few $100,000 of assets, but you have a lot of participants with very low account balances, that record keeper still has a huge amount of work to do, even though you don't have a lot of assets. If you're a very large plan and you have high account balances, they might have less work to do, even though the plan is much larger in terms of the assets. So when you're comparing fees for one plan against, one provider against another, you must compare apples to apples. You will not get the same deal in a small plan with low account balances and many participants. And I'm sure you see this in your audits, right? Sometimes in a restaurant, hospitality industry, you can have lots of zero balances, and that plan still has to have an audit because all of those people are eligible. And audits cost what they cost. There's not a huge difference in the amount of work, Maria, right, that you would have to do to audit a big plan versus a small plan in terms of assets.
Absolutely. Especially because and I don't know if that's going to change, The DOL wants it to be changed, but so far in the limited scope audits, which means that at least we get a certification from the custodian saying, hey, Maria, when that money's with me, I got you covered. You don't have to do that. But we still have to do eligibility, participants, contributions, distributions, loan testing. And it doesn't matter if a loan is $50 or 50,000. You still have to do the testing. You have to figure out if they made it. So unfortunately, the work is pretty much the same with what you're doing. But one of the things that you said that really makes a big difference is keep an eye, as you're the sponsor, keep an eye on how much money, how many assets does your plan have. You guys are all gonna laugh. Size matters on this one. So when you have a lot of assets and they're growing, let's just face it, the market is, even with all the stuff we're going through, the market is doing phenomenal. Well, you got a lot of money. If you're under a $3 million number, you're going to pay an average of about 1.35 points. The higher the number of assets, once you get to 10 million, there are little brackets that you get charged a certain percentage of your assets depending on how much assets you have. And one of the biggest problems that sponsors have is you don't actually really keep an eye on, oh gosh, our plan is really growing. It went from 5 million. Look at us, we're at 75. Well, it makes a big difference because no one's going to be watching out for you. Everybody wants a piece of that. No offense to any of my service providers that are in this seminar. I love you all. But at the same time, no one's going to come knocking on you guys' door, you sponsors, you HR folks that are sitting there, your controllers that are sitting here, going to knock on your door and they're going to say, let us save you some money. Yeah, that's not going to happen. So important part is keep an eye on all this stuff. And as she's talking about the fees, I mean, I'm looking at the TPA. There are a lot of players. And even myself as an auditor, I have to like write these things down to remember who they are. The TPA, the financial advisor, the record keeper, okay, the trustees, the custodians, the CPA. Who does what again? Who wants my money for what? It's definitely something that you're supposed to know, but yet how are we really supposed to know? We're not in the business. How do we know that we're paying too many basis points? Well, this is the reason we're here talking to you about it, because it is your responsibility. As absolutely insane as that sounds, you're supposed to know what reasonable is. I'm sorry, Sherry, I know you're on the other side, but I just truly don't know. So what we're trying to do in this seminar is say, know who those players are that are on your side. I know that all the guys and the gals that I work with in these, they are doing the best that they can to help you, but you have to use them. You can't, I can't tell you how many times I ask my sponsors, how many times did you see your financial advisor? Well, they never come. And then you go, okay, but haven't they tried to call you? Well, yeah, because they forget to tell you that, So don't forget when they're calling you, when we're calling you, when Maria wants a closing meeting, when, your financial advisor wants to talk to you about that. I know it doesn't seem important, but if you don't have those, then you're not going to be seen as if you are learning about reasonableness. That's the key. Are you being reasonable? Do you have to really know all this? Not really. But should you be talking to all of your advisors and your auditor and your attorney to say, you guys, is this reasonable? How do I check? And that's what they're here for. But nobody's going to come knocking on your door and say, let me reduce that for you, mister, because they don't. We get all caught up in the everyday and we forget. So sorry, I just didn't mean to throw that in there, but
No, that's good points, all good points. I would say the ways that you know whether it's reasonable. First of all, as Maria said, meet with your advisors. Create a written record that you checked on it and what you found out and what decision you made on the basis of what you found out. And it can be as simple as at least once a year, go to your providers and say, is this the best deal that I can get right now from you? You would be surprised how often, if you just ask, they will say, oh, let me take a look, and they'll sharpen their pencil and come back and say, your plan's bigger, or, for some other reason, we can lower the fees a little bit. And if that's one thing to do. The other thing to do is every few years, look at the market. That could involve hiring an expert to give you advice about what the market is. It could, benchmarking, comparisons. It could be hiring someone to help you do a request for proposal. If there's been a very big difference in growth in your plan, the gold standard, it's not required every few years, but the gold standard is do a request for proposal. And those are a lot of work. And you've got to, do it and then analyze the information that you get back. You are not required to pick the lowest fee. And I want to emphasize that, because a big part of our law practice is cleaning up messes and mistakes in 401k plans. If you have a really hands-on, competent advisor, it will pay for itself many times over. A lot of times, if you have a, something that's much more based on software, artificial intelligence, you don't have an assigned human that's really looking out for you, you're going to get a lower price, but oftentimes you run into problems because you missed that email that they sent you, or nobody called you to warn you about something that was going to happen that could have been avoided. And if you've got a good advisor, I think picking a good advisor is a big part of the prudence for establishing reasonable fees. They might come to you and say, hey, you've got 20 people here with $3,000 account balances. You're supposed to cash them out, cash those folks out, get yourself a higher average account balance. That gives you more leverage when you negotiate fees. That, most people won't necessarily think about that, but those are techniques that a good advisor will make sure you're following up and following up on these things that are not even that hard to do. You actually don't want those small account balances hanging around. They typically turn into missing participants at some point. And then you have a separate issue. We could do a whole hour on that.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. In fact, when you were saying that it's a lot of work, it's as a sponsor ourselves that have our own audit, and I have to run it from here on the other side. It is a little overwhelming, but at the same time, I realize all you need is to just give the financial advisor all you need is your asset summary. You do a request for, okay, I'm going to be a code head, but it's some kind of a 408B2 fee disclosure. Blah, 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 blah.
Or
that.
a B2.
Exactly. So, exactly. So it's not that big of a deal, and especially for a lot of plans that even though you may or may not be audited, you may or may not have a financial advisor, an actual person that's doing this. You will be surprised that we can get one of those and you end up paying the same amount of money that you're paying today. So I'm just saying, it's not the dollars. You're right, Sherry. It's not the dollar, it's the service. And I tell this to all of my clients, use us. This is what we're here for. Use us. You're paying anyway. Just use the services. And I found that it's very liberating Because even for myself, for the financial advisor, or even our TPA, and our record keeper, they really do have all that. I'm like, oh my God, I don't have the minutes, and the auditor's coming. All I have to do is just give them a shout. It's like, oh yeah, we have to do that because we need to do it for our own internal control. So pretty soon I didn't realize all it took one phone call and I got it all. So use your service providers, which includes all of the people I was talking about. That's our job. It really, really is. So
yeah, so one of the things too that you want to look at is what is actually being paid and where is it coming from and who is it being allocated to? Because often part of the fees in these plans, they're not direct. It's not as if somebody's sending a bill to the plan and it's being deducted directly from participants' accounts. It's often more hidden, and it can show up in revenue sharing. So some funds that are selected for your plan will provide rebates essentially back because those are sales commissions that they're not needing. And others will, for example, many index funds pay no revenue sharing. So there is a movement to try to decide how is it fair when one participant chooses fund A, and that's generating revenue back that is being used to pay plan costs appropriately, while another participant is choosing fund B, where there's no revenue sharing. They're getting a better return on that, but they're not helping to pay for all the advisors that Maria just described. So important to know what is the revenue sharing on every investment fund that you are offering in your plan. And in addition to that, what are the share classes? So if your plan is big enough to have non-retail share classes, you will have fewer fees on that. And in fact, there is now a case that is pending in the United States Supreme Court. They granted this case. It's Hughes versus Northwestern University. We'll have a decision in that case probably by next June. They haven't even heard arguments yet. But many of the class action cases are now being put on hold while we wait to see what the Supreme Court says about particularly share classes and how plan fiduciaries must decide fairness in share classes. The allegation is that the fiduciaries didn't take this into consideration, didn't look at it, and breached their duties. Originally, the case was dismissed. The appellate court agreed, and the dismissal was based on, well, participants have lots of choices here. They can choose non-retail share classes if they want. But the fact that the Supreme Court granted, cert to hear this case suggests that they may not agree with that decision. They don't usually grant cert if they agree. Otherwise, they'll just let the case stand. Other appellate courts have, ruled otherwise, and these cases usually turn on this dismissal stage, right? If a lawsuit's filed, you want to get it dismissed. If you cannot get it dismissed early on, they're very expensive, these cases, to actually go to trial. So what typically happens is, if it's not dismissed, then the insurers, and there are often insurance companies backing everyone up on their fiduciary decisions or on the service provider side, they'll want to start trying to settle the case because it's usually less expensive than going through a discovery and a trial on a case like that. So this case that we're going to wait for in June and that cases are being put on hold for is a dismissal case, as they usually are. The other thing we're seeing in the industry is that all of these cases are driving up the cost of fiduciary insurance. So if you are a plan fiduciary and this sort of thing is keeping you up at night, you can buy fiduciary insurance. And the fiduciary insurance provides for the defense costs if someone ever questions you. And often, even if you have a Department of Labor investigation, you can buy a policy that provides defense costs first dollar. Or sometimes it'll even cover plan corrections if you find a mistake, if you do your audit and Maria finds, you used the wrong definition of compensation, you need to do a voluntary correction. But all of these cases that have been successful are driving up the cost of that insurance. So it'll be very interesting to see how this affects the industry.
Yeah, I'd like to clear something up, Sherry, only because I'm thinking maybe some of my viewers and myself had questions. What you're talking about is not the ERISA bond that you get for our 401k. Everyone knows that you have to have 10% of your assets, and you can go as high as you want to, but you're only required to have up to 500. So number one, you don't have to have 500. You can have more of the ERISA bond, because if you have a plan with $10 million, you probably should have more than 500, even though the required is only 500, and it really only costs a couple $100 more. The cost for the ERISA bond is different. And then the fiduciary is insurance. It's a different thing altogether, which is a very good idea. I'm not a huge over insurance kind of person, but when you have a group in your company that's doing the 401k that has zero experience with the 401k, unless that you really have a good human resources, a person that truly is up on every one of these laws, you may not. I mean, the human resources world right now, I don't even know how you guys do it.
I don't know either.
Oh my gosh, there's a lot. So this is helpful too, because you can get covered for items that you don't even know could come up. So it's never a bad idea. Again, even though the costs are going up, I agree, the cost is not substantial. So if you really have savvy people in your 401k committee or in executive committee and all that, I get that. But even us as CPAs, I'm surprised how little I do know when it comes to actually being the sponsor. I mean, I can tell you as an auditor a lot of different things, but boy, I'll tell you, there's a lot of veers that you take when your sponsor's like, how did that one come up? I didn't see that coming. It's easier for an auditor to go, but boy, as a sponsor, sometimes you don't know when it's going to come up until it hits you in the face. So as I always say, everything is fine until it isn't. So
Right.
They are to insurance. Yeah, I wanted to make sure that was clear, because it took me a while. I didn't know that either. So be aware of that.
Right. And since we're on the topic of insurance, which is, I think, a very important topic here, and one takeaway from this is talk to your broker. Whoever handles your insurance, talk to your broker about the bond. It may need to be higher than 10% if you have non-publicly traded assets, if you have some odd assets in there.
Yeah,
That's something that is often a mistake that's made.
good point.
Yeah. And then the other would be consider cyber insurance. Do you have any cyber insurance coverage for functions of the plan itself? Make sure you're looking at your policies, because the fiduciary insurance typically, they are often exclusions now for cyber. And yet we have the Department of Labor putting a big emphasis on cybersecurity for benefit plans, because first of all, they hold a lot of money. The 401k plans alone in this country, 6.5 trillion. That's just 401k plans.
Just gigantic.
It's gigantic. And the number of ransomware, cyber attacks, phishing attacks that can happen in a 401k plan, or even in a health plan, are huge. So the Department of Labor has now put out best practices. We could do another whole hour on that if folks are interested.
Wow.
On cyber, but the other thing to think about while you're on insurance is think about fiduciary insurance, make sure your bond is compliant, and think about, do you need to add the plan as a named insured? Is it covered? Like, work with your broker on the cyber risk for your plan as well. Before we move on, we didn't talk about fee levelization. So fee levelization is a process where, and a lot of record keepers can do this now. 10 years ago, they couldn't, but the industry evolves, where you try to take this difference in revenue sharing and share classes and make it fair across the board for the participants, so that there might be a base fee that every participant is going to pay, just a flat dollar amount, regardless of what share they buy, what investment product they buy, that everybody's going to pay something. And then the revenue sharing layers on top of that. And my more sophisticated, larger clients, we actually have financial advisors now that are doing an analysis that they're presenting once a year on the share classes that they're in, because sometimes a less expensive share class is actually not the best for the plan. If it would give more revenue sharing, and I can't go into all of this, I'm not as sophisticated as the financial advisors, but they're providing data to our committees about which share class makes sense for that particular investment product, comparing it to the revenue sharing. So if you've got larger plans, it can get somewhat complicated. We're not doing this constantly, but about once a year, we're looking and saying, all right, does this really make sense? Is this the best deal we can get, taking into account all of these intricacies that we're describing right now? The other thing I just wanted to mention is that Congress did change the law and required the Department of Labor to start requiring fee disclosure for health and welfare plans. We're on 401ks today, but that will take effect at the end of this year. And we've had no guidance from the Department of Labor. So at this point, it's going to be a good faith standard that you have a fee disclosure from your health and welfare plan provider. And you've taken that into account. Many times there's no opportunity to really negotiate that, because if it's insurance, it's regulated by the state, and commissions and things are set by the state. But if you have a self-funded plan, or if you have other opportunities, you at least need to pay attention to that. That's a brave new world that maybe by next year we'll have figured out a little bit more. But this Section 4AB2 that we've mentioned a couple times, it is now being extended out to health and welfare plans. So, the world just becomes more complex every day.
That's an understatement. I know. And you know what? One of the items that always went through my mind is when they talk about shared classes, I always went, well, are the shares differently? I mean, like, what are they talking about? And was kind of above my head, and until I really started thinking about it and reading about it. And it's like the security or the stock is really the same stocks that you own. It's really all about the expense and the cost that they have. Some of them charge up front, like the A shares, and some of them are C shares, which is a back end load, or no load, or the I shares, which are institutional shares, or the R shares that don't have loads, but they carry the revenue. So as a sponsor, I tell you what, is ABC soup for me, because ABC is like, and I have my license I did learn all this, but I'll tell you what, it is a challenge. So this is why it is important to not feel shy about not understanding something, and reach out to your advisors, to your auditors, and ask the question. Because I'm telling you right here, we don't know. I mean, one of my top assurance managers a few days ago. I mean, the investments, when you have gigs and when you have all of these special, guaranteed insurance trusts and all that, they're not that easy to really decipher until you really, really read it. And sometimes we think we got one thing and you don't. You think you have vanilla, but really, no, I think you had Oreo. And it's important to read all that stuff, or at least hire people that can read it and can help you.
Well, and in this very low interest rate environment that we've been in now for so long, I can't even remember, back to the early in the 2009, 2010, that impacts things as well. So for example, we have a client that offers a money market fund, and intuitively everyone thinks a money market fund cannot lose money. It's dollar for dollar. And in fact, for many years now, the investment folks that offer that fund have been themselves losing money on it because interest rates are so low. There's not enough revenue being generated to even pay the costs of running the fund. So the fund is going to go slightly negative. We're working with the plan fiduciary to make sure a notice goes out to the participants saying, you might want to pay attention to the fact that the money market fund is about to go negative before you see a minus in your participant statement of your money market fund, which you thought you were putting it in something that was extremely safe. And it is safe in general, but it's not to the point where you can't also lose some money in it when we are in these crazy low interest rates over a very long sustained period with no real end in sight. So one more point that I want to make, and I meant to make this on the cyber as well. The service agreements, the contracts that you enter into with your service providers, that is one of the pieces of reasonableness. So if you enter into a contract with a great low fee, but you've given away the store, the service provider is not held to any standards, there are no cybersecurity privacy language in that service contract, you still could be running afoul of the reasonableness. And the Department of Labor has been emphasizing in their publications that on the cyber side, reasonableness means you also must vet the service providers for their cyber safety and make sure that your contract, your service contract, reflects good cyber practices. We do a lot of review of service contracts, and I can tell you that we all almost always, I can't think of once that we saw a service contract that we just said, yeah, it's great, we have no changes. But also, the providers will negotiate. It is as much in their interest to make sure fees are reasonable and nobody's engaging in a prohibited transaction as it is yours. And so we have found, especially over the last 5 to 10 years, they're very willing to negotiate. Sometimes, in my view, they're not that reasonable, but they have their reasons. In their view, they are reasonable. And we can usually find some, happy middle ground on the language in the service contract. But those service contracts start out as written by the lawyers for the service providers, not the lawyers for the plan fiduciaries. So you're starting out typically with a contract that's already one-sided, and some of your reasonableness depends on it. For example, in the Department of Labor regulations, specifically, they call out the termination clause. If you sign a contract that doesn't let you get the plan out of it if it doesn't work out without paying some fee, that can be a breach right there. You've got to look at the termination clauses, absolutely, because that's called out in the regulations.
Wow.
So we have a few questions Do you want me to take those, or do you want to start with one, Maria?
You know what? I'm going to start with one that is saying, does benchmarking have different meanings to different people? And I have to say that in my experience in doing audits, it definitely does, because everyone uses the term benchmarking. And every time I ask a client, have you had your review? Have you benchmarked? Oh yeah, well, we do it all the time. Okay, well, send me a copy of it. And then you find out that it's really just benchmarking of the investments. So there's different types of benchmarking. You know, they're external, which you compare to other organizations. They're competitive. It's compared to direct competitors of yours. There's performance. In the 401k plan world, you compare your plan to similar plans. So there's the plan design, there's a service provider, there are funds that you're comparing, and fees. So there's really 4 things that you're doing. One of them, which the one that everyone knows about, is comparing what you've invested in and how much it's earning as to compare to what others are doing and how well you're doing. And that's why providers are, every once in a while, you see them switching the platform. Okay, wait a minute, this one's kind of going in the tank. We're going to be putting this other fund in. That's actually something that most of you guys do, and you do very well. What you don't do a lot is the actual fees that you're paying. Number one, is intimidating. No one really knows what we're really paying. The audit doesn't even say seriously what it is that you're doing. So be very clear when we're talking about benchmarking, what you're benchmarking. Are we benchmarking our provider? Are we paying providers more money? That, you know, is our what are we really comparing? Or am I really comparing different kind of funds? Like you were saying, Sherry, stable value funds, mutual funds, balance funds. What am I really reviewing? So yes, I believe the answer to that is absolutely it is. And don't think that it isn't, because you do have 4 things that you're checking. And you should be able to check that, all of them, once a year, at least.
At the very least, and create a record that you checked it. As a lawyer, you always need to have a record.
That's okay. As an accountant, is if you didn't write it down, it didn't happen. In fact, I have it directly from personal experience. If you didn't write it down, it didn't happen. We absolutely hate writing it down, but we are absolute sticklers about writing it down.
One other question that came up is, why don't we always see this on the 5,500 or the audited financial statements? And that's because, as we've discussed, some of the fees are indirect, behind the scenes. Essentially, you're only going to know about it if you dig for it. So it doesn't show up. It's built into the numbers that are in the financial statements. I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that one, Maria.
No, you're exactly right. I see plans with 10 million, 50 million, 100 million, and the cost is $2,340. I'm like, yeah, I don't think so. Now, as an auditor, just letting you know, it is not, we're supposed to be looking at it, but because it's not a very high number, considering even at worst, you're paying 1.5 of your plan assets, it's really not the highest cost and the highest activity that we're really looking at, because we're really watching out for independently all the participants. So the participants, if you're off $1 for the contributions, there is no materiality. You got to look for that $1. As compared to fees, now you have materiality items, which isn't really that high. So definitely always realize that yes, it's supposed to be on the 5,500, that one schedule. It's a Schedule C. I forget the schedule number, but believe me, it isn't always there. And that started, what, 5 years or more ago that it was required? It's still not up to date. People still don't know how to do it right. So you can't even follow that.
All right. Well, the last question, what are my legal obligations as a plan sponsor? I will just leave it again with the distinction. If you're the plan sponsor, unless you delegate the responsibility to a committee or you hire a fiduciary, an independent fiduciary yourself, it is your responsibility. It is your liability. The liability is personal as well, company and personal. So, there are multiple ways to address and mitigate any potential liability. The first being just do a really good job and document it, but insurance would be another. Delegating to a committee would be third, or hiring another fiduciary, and being prudent about that. So that's all of our questions. I'm going to turn it over to you, Jill.
Thank you so much, Sherry. And we want to thank all of you for joining Maria and Sherry today. We hope you found this helpful. A lot of information was covered. So as I mentioned in the beginning, we're going to be sending you a really wonderful checklist that Sherry put together to help you monitor these fees and get you going. Remember that Sherry's firm is always there to help you out, and also Maria Ariola with LSL CPAs is there as well. On behalf of LSL, I want to thank all of you for coming, and until next time, make it a great day. Bye-bye now.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Take care, guys.